unfortunately, Republicans rejected reforms that even the previous president had supported and refused to engage on key issues that many in law enforcement were willing to address. And so we are disappointed. The president is disappointed, even after Senator Booker and Representative Bass did yeoman's work, even after they worked to secure law enforcement support and showed they were willing to find consensus. So, yes, we acknowledge, of course, what the negotiators have conveyed publicly at this point in time. I can convey to you that in the coming weeks, we're going to consult the president. We will all, our team, will consult with members of Congress, the law enforcement, civil rights communities, and victims' families to discuss a path forward, including potential executive actions the president can take to ensure we live up to the American ideal of equality, justice under law.
And on the situation on the southern border, there was a meeting today with members of the CBC. The vice president talked to the Homeland Security Secretary to express concern. How often does this get to the president? Does he get briefed on these situations, or is he just getting it in news reports?
Of course he gets briefed on them, absolutely, by his team.
Okay. Well, to the point that we were trying to ask him about yesterday, what is his impression of this situation down there? What does he make of how those Border Patrol agents were seen to be interacting with these migrants? And, you know, where is he on dealing with these wide range of immigration issues that continue to challenge this government?
Well, Ed, on the subject of the video footage and the photos, the president was horrified by that, just as we all were. He, of course, received a briefing and update from his national security team on the efforts by the Secretary of Homeland Security to launch an investigation, and one that he would like to see concluded rapidly. As it relates to our efforts to implement our immigration laws and border requirements, the president is quite hopeful, as he conveyed on his first day in office when he introduced an immigration bill, that we can take steps to put in place a more humane, a more orderly system, especially after a very broken one over the last several years, that has better asylum processing, that has a better system and a range of programs individuals can apply to. The president also believes and knows, as we all do, we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and we need to continue to administer Title 42, which expels individuals who come to the border. So he is horrified by the photos and the footage. He is also committed to implementing and abiding by our laws.
And what is your understanding of what transpired in the Oval Office yesterday when we were all in there trying to hear from the president and the prime minister?
Which aspect?
Well, the British prime minister in the American Oval Office called out British reporters, and then when American reporters tried to call in the American president, we were escorted out, let's put it that way.
Well, I think in that circumstance, and I think our relationship with the United Kingdom and with Prime Minister Johnson is so strong and abiding, we will be able to move forward beyond this. But he called on individuals from his press corps without alerting us to that intention in advance. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. Just following up on this very basic but very important question. Mm-hmm. You're telling us that the DHS chief has the most recent numbers about how many of these Haitians under the bridge have been sent back and how many have been released into the U.S. The DHS chief is telling us that he doesn't know. So who else can we ask?
You can certainly ask the Department of Homeland Security. I am confident, Peter. I am confident he wanted to have the most up-to-date numbers, and we will venture to get you those, I promise you, this afternoon.
Is this an issue of not knowing, or is this an issue of a lot more people are being released into the U.S. than are being sent out?
That is certainly not the issue. First, I think it's important to reiterate what I conveyed earlier about what the actual process is. Individuals are expelled under Title 42. If they can't be expelled under Title 42, they are put into a removal process. If they are put into a removal process, they're either transported to an ICE facility or released with a legal document. That legal document includes fingerprints, photos, phone numbers, an address in the United States, and a background check. That's the process that transpires. That's a part of our immigration process, regardless of where you're coming from.
And just because you keep using Title 42 to defend this administration's immigration policies, that is a Trump-era regulation. You guys came in saying that the Trump era immigration policy was very inhumane.
Title 42 is not an immigration policy. It is a health authority because we're in the middle of a pandemic. The Trump administration approach to immigration was inhumane and was immoral. That's why we need to put a new policy in place, and we need Congress to pass that policy.
Unified control, democratic control of Congress. Many months in office, you have not even tried.
That's not actually true. There's been a Peter, just factual here. There's been a bill proposed first day in office. Currently, it was proposed as a part of steps were proposed as part of the reconciliation process. Right, the parliamentarian rejected that proposal. They're going back and proposing new options. President supports that. He would like to see immigration reform passed into law, more humane processes.
Just one more. Has President Biden ever been to the southern border?
In his life?
Yes.
I will have to look back in my history books and check the times he's been to the southern border.
We have been looking all morning, and we cannot find any record of him visiting the border as president, vice president, senator, or even as a concerned citizen. Why would that be?
I can check and see when the last time or when he may have been. But tell me more about why you're asking.
Because this is a president who makes a point when there are disasters in this country, like a wildfire or a hurricane, to go and see for himself firsthand what the needs are of the local community so that he can have an informed POV to make policy. Why doesn't he do that? Why doesn't he go down to Del Rio, Texas, and see what's going on?
Well, first of all, Peter, I think the situation at the border is the result of a broken system. And the president certainly relies on his experience. So whether it was the work he did to address root causes as vice president, his efforts when he was in the Senate to support comprehensive immigration reform, steps that at a time were being done and worked toward in a bipartisan way, something that certainly we think should be the case today. He uses all of his experiences to inform how he governs, how he approaches challenges, and certainly he looks again at the last 4 years and the separation of children who were ripped from the arms of their parents as a way he does not want to proceed. So all of his experiences and his time in office, whether vice president or Senate, inform his approach to issues.
Hey, I'm Rob Finnerty. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please join the conversation in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, too. Hit the bell icon to be alerted to breaking news. And remember, there's a whole lot more on Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news network. Newsmax TV, we're real news for real people.